Here today for the interview is Dr. Rick Jetter. Rick is currently the assistant head of school at Western New York Maritime Charter School. Rick is also a co founder of Pushing Boundaries Consulting. He is an author and a co author of many books, including the book we're going to focus on today, which is entitled You're Number One: The Science and Reasons Behind Why We Remember Some of Our Teachers Forever. Rick has worked in the field of education for almost 25 years, so clearly he is bringing a wealth of experience to our conversation today. So, Rick, thanks for being here today.
Hey, good morning, sir. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Certainly been connected with you on social media, our first time meeting face to face, and really looking forward to our conversation today. And before we get into the content of the book, which I'm really curious about, I just share with listeners, Rick, your career, the arc of your career, the journey, from the beginning of your career to where you ended up today as an assistant head of school, an author, a speaker, and a consultant. What's that journey looked like for you?
Yeah, I actually had years ago something posted on my website, this mythical hierarchy, like this roller coaster going up, right? That promotion, 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 promotion. People will clobber me, but I don't really believe there's a promotion in education. I think you kind of find your footing wherever you are. So I started off my career as an alternative ed teacher and stepped into an ELA classroom, assistant principal, principal, assistant superintendent, superintendent, right? You see where it's headed?
Yeah.
So people are like, oh, promotion, promotion. But then I faced a nightmare board of education. I became a nightmare myself, started drinking heavily, had some adversity that just I couldn't get out of, made some bad choices, and then went into an educational resources company, which was kind of like a scholastic, right? And was a business development curriculum specialist there. Loved it, learned a lot about the publishing industry. And then I went back to the classroom. And then from there, I became the assistant head of schools. And in between, started setting up a business with Rebecca Coda, my good friend and business partner, and started writing all sorts of stuff. So, you know, mine was like this,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
was every experience that I've had, I have no regrets. It made me a better person than I am today. And I love education. And even though it's been an absolute nightmare recently, I'm going to stick it out and stay in it and do what I can to help others.
Yeah. Well, first, let me say, Rick, congratulations for finding your way forward. Certainly, we get into situations that we don't anticipate. It takes us down a pathway that we never imagined, and for you to have the strength and courage to find your way out of that and find your way back into a life where you're feeling fulfilled again and inspiring people. So congratulations on that. You're,
Thanks.
you're absolutely you're absolutely right about this idea that there's just we always envision this perfect trajectory, and you never really know where you're going to end up, and you never know what it is cliche to say one door closes, another door opens, but it really does play out that way. And sometimes three left turns make a right, and I'll try not to use too many cliches during our conversation, but it makes me think of that as you were describing your journey there. So let's begin with the question, I think the overarching question that I would ask about the book. You're number one, why we remember our teachers. So Rick, what does the research tell us about why we remember some of our teachers forever? What is the research telling you about that?
Yeah, so I just want to do a shout out to my co-author, Dr. Holly Blair. She is the executive director of the Maine Principals Association. We met back when she invited Rebecca and I out to do a book series. We did a launch of both The Dunk Tank and Let Them Speak.
Mhm.
So, we met her, fell in love with her. And from there, Holly and I were like, let's write this book,
Mhm.
you are number one, and let's ask people, right? So we got our research from educators and parents and like people everywhere, hundreds and hundreds of qualitative data that started to come streaming through our files, right?
Mhm.
And what we did was we looked at that research like a doctor would look at their dissertation, and we had to figure out, all right, what does this all mean? And we found through our research of people all over the nation, we even had some people overseas chime in and give us their thoughts. Here are the qualities, right? These characteristics that are tried and true of what they believe make memorable teachers, right?
Mhm.
And we didn't try to make 10 of them or 20 of them. We found 9 common characteristics, and it was like, if I can memorize them right now, it's like teachers are caring,
Mhm.
nice, funny, exciting, involved, understanding, they have great wisdom, they're human,
Hmm.
and they're devoted to the profession in
Right.
unique ways, right?
Yeah.
So again, those are the nine. We didn't squeeze out any more. We just looked at what people were sending us, and they were sending us narratives of memorable teachers, and we threw those word for word verbatim in our appendices.
Yeah.
So people can like look through and be like, oh wow, look at these are real stories from real people who remember their
Yeah.
teachers on top of what the book's research, really
Yeah.
demonstrated to us. So that's kind of how it all came about. It was a really cool process.
Yeah.
It took us about, I would say, 5 or 6 months just to start nailing the research before we actually did the writing of the book.
Right. What? So were they weren't all educators though? Were they? Was it what percentage of the contributors were educators?
Yeah, I would say it was about 65%. We had
Okay.
people who were parents. We had people who didn't have children who wanted to just share a story of a memorable teacher. So
Okay.
we had a pretty good canvas, and it felt good because we weren't only looking at educators
Right.
to chime in on what they felt as an educator would be
Yeah.
memorable.
Right, right. Because it is interesting if you did have an audience that was 100% educators. When you think about the percentage of students in any school that will end up going into education, it's very small. And yet we all end up on a faculty, and then we all start talking about what works for us, what's memorable for us, and we're not really a microcosm of our student body because we are that. I often say we are the 1%. We're not the 1% by salary, of course,
Yeah.
but we are the 1% of, if 1% of our student population would become educators, I think that's actually a reach in some schools. And yet we all end up on a faculty. We all start making policy decisions. We all think about what works, and we may not be the best sort of gauge. So the idea that you had, people who didn't have children, people who were not educators, I think that's wise because it probably, well, I shouldn't say probably, it definitely gives you a more well-rounded perspective.
Just
Um,
a just another cool aside, I had my 3 kids, sit at the computer and fill out that Google form without any
Interesting.
prompting from me. Yeah, I said, "Guys, one by one, go ahead, sit down, fill this out."
Yeah.
So their stories are included as well.
Yeah. With no editing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You can't say that. No, I'm just
No,
teasing.
we actually put,
Yeah.
everything in the appendices the way that it came through, so
Fantastic. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. One of the things I thought about when I first read the title of the book and thought about, remembering teachers, I immediately went to positive, like inspired and all of that. But there is another side to this, remembering our teachers forever. And that is sometimes, and I know we hate to talk about this, but there are sometimes we remember our teachers forever because of a negative experience. And I find that the negative memories, on balance, not always, but often, tend to be more at the front of our minds. I know that when I'm in workshops with participants talking about assessment and feedback, I'll often ask the participants in the workshop to think of a time when they were provided feedback and it was a positive experience versus a negative experience. And it's the negative experiences they seem to remember more readily. The positive experience take a little bit more time. So I'm curious from your perspective, Rick, why do you think the negative experiences tend to be so entrenched in our minds? Like, why is it that we remember those so clearly and so readily versus the positive ones?
yeah, that's a wicked cool question, and, I was thinking a little bit about it, and I actually came up with a new term that isn't written in this book,
Hmm.
and it's your one can be traumatically sensorized, right?
Mhm.
So let's look at the positives first, right? Positive situations, there's stimuli that takes place, there's sensory things that come into our brain through all of our senses, and it creates a memory for us. The negative ones might be kind of that firecracker that goes off, and it could be a very traumatic sensory type of situation, right? So we even start the book off with a story of Mr. Michaels, okay? And that's a pseudonym for a teacher who had massive sensory things going on that started to create a traumatic environment in his classroom. And it ranged from having his cigarettes rolled up in his sleeve to smoking in between classes to, eating sandwiches that kids, I don't know, eat anymore. Olive loaf, does that still exist, right? And right, so now all these sensory things, the bad breath, the nastiness, the making kids come up and treating them, like they're dogs to his desk when he would red pen them, right? So
Hmm.
all these sensories come in and they're more traumatic than some of the positive teachers out there and the positive experiences. So I think you're right. Sometimes the negative surfaces quicker because they're more traumatic sensory events that take place that
Right.
the brain then triggers, filters, and creates a memory space for it, like a filing cabinet.
Yeah. When you consider that we are in our youth, when we're children, adolescents, we're still not adults and we're still in our formative years. And I think so many of those moments are so impressionable. I know that again, the idea, I think that's fairly obvious, but at the same time, it does explain why, it also explains why we cheer for the same sports teams we did when we were 12, because we just can't, the things that happen to us in our youth tend to and as children, pre-adolescents, et cetera, tend to be that traumatic experience. And, your use of the word trauma, of course, listeners will remember that earlier this year, I talked a little bit about trauma-informed assessment practices. And one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my own reading, because I by no means am an expert on trauma, but one of the lessons I've learned is that trauma is not a memory. Like trauma is a reaction. And so the reactions are so immediate that you end up remembering it right away because it isn't a memory. It's happening to you now because you've been sort of triggered in that way. So, that I think your use of the word trauma in that particular situation around those negative experiences is a appropriate word to use for sure. All right. So when we think about being memorable, is is being memorable, is that a way I should think about my classroom? Is that a front end decision that I should make as a teacher? Like, is that the right or appropriate lens through which to kind of examine my practices when I teach? Should I think about, well, this is how students are going to remember me? So what is it that I should be thinking about as a classroom teacher?
You know, that's really interesting to me because at first it might sound conceited,
Right.
right? Like, oh, how am I going to be a memory for people to, last their lives forever, right? It sounds conceited and very self-centered, but the more I think about it, if we want to create memorable experiences for kids, and I'm thinking of Dave Burgess right now. If I had Dave Burgess as my teacher, I'd probably be a history teacher right now. The guy blows everybody's minds. His energy is so, it just gets you excited to even want to be around him. And I think about, okay, memorable teachers, what are those? And can we front load it in terms of, should that be a goal of ours? I think, people's natural charisma and love of life and their positive attitude, I think all those things can be, can carry others through their lives and be memorable experiences. So when I think about memorable, I think you can plan for that. How do you want to have a lasting impact on your students forever? And we're going to put the conceitedness aside. We'll put that aside. It's not about that. It's not about being a hero that everybody raises up on their shoulders and he's the best, we love him, and give him awards. And
Yeah.
but just being memorable can be broken down into these 9 areas and
Right.
probably even more, if we came out with a book too, and listen to more people about what makes memorable experiences come alive in the classroom.
Yeah. I had the same reaction when I wrote the question, which was, initially I thought this feels a little egocentric. And then I thought to myself, if I'm memorable for the right reasons and I
Right.
think about being and embodying those characteristics that make me memorable in a substantive way, then what's wrong with that? Now, I can also be memorable for letting students do whatever they want. I can be memorable for not pushing students to reach high levels of academic performance. I can be memorable for letting all demonstrations of sort of inappropriate or antisocial behavior go. Like I could be memorable for a lot of negative reasons, or I could be memorable. So I don't know that just being memorable or deciding to be memorable. I think for me, as I thought about how you might answer this question, I thought being memorable for the right reasons, being
Right.
memorable because I embody those things that really do encapsulate what it is we want from our students. So I want to explore a few of
And,
these
and Tom,
ideas. Go ahead.
if I
Yeah,
could
go
just
ahead.
jump in on that, because you're making a really great point. If a teacher makes a mistake, that's okay, so
Yeah.
long as they take that negative memory and they flesh that out and work with the kids on,
Hmm.
hey, you know what? I messed up here. I'm really sorry. Here's how I'm going to make it right. So
Right.
even the most positive teachers have that humility and that
Yeah.
humanity piece, right? That's number 9 or
For
number
sure.
8 in our book,
Yeah. Yeah.
that they can shape their own humanity so that they're not just the ones who are always going to do the right things and be a flawless human being. I mean,
Right.
no one's perfect.
No, exactly. And being memorable for a positive reason doesn't mean I'm always positive.
Right.
I can, like you said, I can make a mistake. And if I own that mistake and if I, make amends and I just take ownership over the situation, that also makes me memorable, even though I've kind of messed up in that situation. So I want to explore a few of these a little more, intricately. You went through the list, and for listeners, again, the specifics of that list is that, and many of them I think are fairly self-evident in the sense that if a teacher is caring, if they're nice, if they're funny, involved, if they have show understanding, if they have wisdom, all of those really do make you memorable. And I think those are fairly self-evident. But I want to explore a few of them, and maybe let's go back and forth on a few of these, and have you
Sure.
expand a little bit about what people said about teachers. So you wrote that we remember teachers because they're exciting. What do you mean by exciting? What does that How did that manifest in the things that people told you?
Yeah, it's like, it's not only what they do in the classroom, it's how they teach something, and it's how they get kids to come alive, right?
Okay.
So, and I used that example of Dave earlier, but
Yeah.
let me use one of his examples that he has on his social media videos. He compares learning to being in an amusement park, right? And when you're in an amusement park, they make you exit through the gift shop. So if you're riding, this ride and it's all about polar bears, you go in the gift shop. Dad, I want to learn this book about polar bears and this about, right. So it's how do you make people come alive? How do you activate an interest in something? And it might be telling that one kid, man, you are a wicked cool writer. And
Hmm.
I'm going to give you this journal and I want you to take it home and just start writing stuff down that you're thinking about. And let's turn this into a book, man, and let's get it
Hmm.
published. And, right. So it's even just a compliment for a kid that makes their world come alive. And that's beyond excitement. That's then taking someone and trying to help them become more than they think they can become. And that's the excitement piece that, you know, I've I am so honored that, being an ELA teacher and teaching writing and getting excited about, really cool arguments that you can make. And I have 3 or 4 kids graduating next month who are interested in going for journalism and writing, creative writing.
Hmm.
And I, that blows my mind because that I activated something in them
Right.
just by getting them juiced up, right? It's like, I'm gonna stab a B12 shot in them and get them pumped up. And they might not really follow through with it, which is fine, but they'll always remember, Dr. J, man, he thought I was a good writer, and nobody's ever told me that before. And I'm gonna jot down some things in my journal and just keep it flowing, maybe, and try it.
Yeah.
So that I think is the excitement piece.
Is it more about creating exciting opportunities? Because I'm wondering about the teacher who's thinking to themselves, Rick, I hear your energy, or Dave Burgess energy, or whatever. I don't have that. That's not my personality. That's not how I teach. I don't want to mimic other people. That doesn't authentically reflect who I am. So if I'm that teacher, is it more about creating exciting opportunities for students? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you don't have to be caffeinated and your eyes bulging out of your head and running around the room like
Yeah.
it really is. You don't have to be someone other than who you are, but that you can flip that switch and activate some sort of excitement with kids.
Right.
You can have any personality on the planet, and you can, like I said, you can drink decaf and just do the same, have the same power.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, you also write in the book that, and we've touched on this a little bit, but I want to explore this a little further because I think there's some gray areas that teachers may feel comfortable or uncomfortable with, and it's this idea of being human.
Mm.
So teachers are memorable because they are human. In what ways? Where's that line between being vulnerable, being human, but then also maybe sharing too much or being too open with your students? Where would that line might be?
Yeah, so our students come to us with all they connect with us,
Yeah.
and they tell us all sorts of stuff we had no idea they were even that was gonna come out of their mouth, right?
Yeah.
And they're sharing their lives with us, and we're always mentors to them. And the human through our research had to do with loss and mistakes and hurt.
Okay.
If teachers can identify with kids about their losses and hurt and their mistakes, and that's kind of tied to wisdom as well in the book, right?
Okay.
It's being able to you know kneel down to a kid, look him in the eyes and say, hey man, look at this is what happened to me too, and I'll tell you, here's what I learned from it, right? And having that type of humanistic characteristics of sharing all those tragedies, even not that you're going to plague them with all your baggage, but that you're going to be able to relate to them, listen to them, and then share things about yourself that creates that bond together with kids.
Hmm. Hmm.
And we've all experienced some sort of lost tragedy, right? We've all experienced something, but the fact that the research gets us to think about, wow, these create memorable experiences for kids where somebody comes back and, hey, Dr. J, I remember when you were talking about this, man, and
Hmm.
I'm thank you for listening, and it just some of the ideas you had for me to try to pull myself out of that dark hole was really cool, man. And I wanted to
Hmm.
tell you thanks.
Yeah.
It those are the memorable teachers, those mentorships of humanity that last forever.
Yeah. Makes me, as you were responding there, it makes me think of the idea that sometimes we have to stop being the teacher and just be a person
Yeah.
and just connect, right? That empathy, that understanding. I know that a lot of teachers, as they begin the career, think they have to stay buttoned up. They've got to stay distant. They've got to, and to a point you do, of course. But there's also that side that says, I understand what you're going through, or just listening and not always offering the immediate solution, but because we don't always have all of the answers, and sometimes students just need someone that will listen to them and empathize with what they're going through, and that they'll work through it. But if we're always pouncing, if we're always being the teacher, then I think sometimes we don't show our humanity in that way. The other one that really caught my attention was this devoted to the profession. I'm wondering, well, two things I'm wondering with that. One is specifically, what are you referring to there? But second, I'm wondering how the students would know. How will they know that I'm devoted to the profession?
Yeah, so they're gonna hinge on everything that comes out of your mouth, right?
Hmm.
And that can be either directly to them or something they overhear, which makes them think that maybe someone isn't exactly devoted to the profession in the way that they think about you as a kid.
Okay.
And I'm not bashing unions or bashing people who don't believe in charter schools or anything like that. But when students overhear things about, like, you know, we're told not to stay past 3:30 because we're in negotiations right now, and when kids pick up on that, they don't see you as devoted to the profession or devoted to them. And I'm
Hmm.
not saying those discussions shouldn't happen, but they should be where kids can't hear them, and they shouldn't hear about charter schools with money that's tied to their heads and how they travel from one school to another. So one district loses money because of school choice. And so all these types of politics and issues and things that teachers may be feeling, if kids grab a hold of that and they hear you talking about that, that's going to put you in that line of a negative memory. You know, that's not going to, and again, have those conversations. Everybody's entitled to that. I was just reading an article about a school, I think it was in Massachusetts, the teachers went on strike. And even though it's against the law to go on strike in that certain province, in that area, um, the teachers did what they felt they had to do to stay strong within their union. But in what ways does that have a negative impact on the kids, right? Who
Hmm.
are told to stay home that day. So we talk about devoted to the profession in ways that don't paint a negative picture for why we got into this career, why we got into this career passion. And
Mhm.
if our kids overhear stuff like that, they lose respect for us.
Yeah.
And there are adult conversations that should be had, absolutely 100%. But then there are adult conversations that hit the ears of our children, and it doesn't make us look good sometimes, you know. So I think that's that devotion to the profession, is that the kids feel like they're number one, and we want to feel number one.
Mhm.
And anything that kind of pasteurizes that into something else, you know, doesn't make us a positive, memorable teacher.
It's an interesting idea, certainly a blurry line, because when you were going through that, it made me think about our previous just moments ago talking about being human. And certainly, my place of employment, my compensation, my life, my workload, that is all part of my humanity. And so this ping pong between, kind of glossing over and, being something or pretending to be something that I am not in my humanity, does that compromise my humanity while I'm trying to, in some respects, shield students from the conversations? Some of them will watch the news, they'll hear about negotiations on TV. It has nothing to do with what the teachers are talking about, but they'll see them in the interviews and things like that. What are your thoughts on that? Because again, I recognize where you're coming from in those extreme conversations. I think we need to shield, but at the same time, if I am human, if I am showing my humanity, where's that line for you? Where do you see that?
Yeah, you know, and one example, and things that I've heard teachers say is, I don't get paid enough.
Mm,
Now, let's just take that one statement, right? If a kid hears that, now, the kids aren't in the faculty room, they're not, you
right.
know, but if a kid hears that, you know, I don't get paid enough, what does that translate in their brain as?
Mhm.
Well, they don't care enough about me. Whatever their pay is, right? I mean, that could just have a different message behind it. So
Right. Right.
I am certainly, Holly and I are not telling people to stop being who you are or believing what you believe. But there's that point in terms of, what are the kids going to see and feel from you, right? That
Right.
energy and that passion to be there. And, you know, if a teacher comes in and say, hey, look at, I had a really rough night. I was up all night because, you know, I had the runs or something, you know what I mean? That's different than some of those other things that still make us human, but create a negative response system for our kids.
Right. That's probably where that line is, right? And making
Right.
sure that students don't get the impression, rightly or wrongly, that well, with more money you would care about me. But
Right. Right.
yeah, so being mindful of that, because I think it is a fine balance that teachers walk, in terms of showing their humanity, understanding the emotions of the time, and some of those negotiations can be incredibly stressful,
Oh yeah.
and going on strike can put families' financial situations in difficulty, and that is very human, and that is part of being an adult, and yet I do think there is a point where we have to shield some of that from students so that they don't get the wrong idea that
Yeah.
this is, even though it is our place of employment and this is our job, we go to work. I mean, I had a colleague of mine years ago who used to correct people when they say, how was school today? And she, as a teacher, would say, I don't go to school, I go to work. Like, that's my job. I'm not in school, I'm not a student, right? And
Right.
she wasn't being indignant about it, but she
Right.
was just basically saying, this is my place of employment, this is my profession, right? But that idea of shielding it, from the students to a point, so they don't get that wrong impression about, because
100%.
because even if teachers are in the midst of negotiations, they still care deeply about their students and want them to do well. And we don't want to get that false idea. Listeners, the book is called "You Are Number One: The Science and Reasons Behind Why We Remember Some of Our Teachers Forever," and we definitely do. Rick, we've got two questions as we finish up today. These are questions that I ask all people who come on the podcast. The first one, and you can take this in any direction you want to go. Uh, but the question is, educationally speaking, what keeps you up at night?
Oh man, you know, sometimes I'm so tired that I sleep no matter what, but you're right. What does keep me up? It's, oh gosh, Tom, there is so much going on right now.
Yeah.
And I just, in, you know, in what ways can we teach kids to think critically without, I'll use myself, without me pushing my beliefs down a kid's throat.
Right.
And there's a big difference. That keeps me up at night, not because of the media. You know what? I'm almost, I almost don't even bother with the media at all,
Mm.
because it's so hard to trust, the media. But what's interesting about our school, Tom, the school that I work at, is we are sponsored by the United States Navy. We are an NJROTC school, and we are not allowed to share our specific belief system with our students, with our cadets.
Mm.
And it makes me think of those Marines who stand at Air Force One. It doesn't matter who the president is.
Right.
They respect the position. We're not saying they have to respect the president. We respect the position. We respect our country. We can have kids think critically about any issue. But the moment I say I'm pro this or against that, I'm going to turn half of my classroom off, if not more. And I think we can do things in a very artistic, creative way, still dealing with difficult issues. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But doing it where we don't take kids down a different path just because it's the path we want them to go down.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think that as much as any time in my career, teachers definitely have to walk that fine line of causing thinking, helping students sort of process what's happening in the world, and yet trying to remove any of our perspectives, bias, et cetera, or political leanings. That is a fine line that we definitely walk. Last question, Rick, as we finish up today, is about personal success. Just generally speaking, again, take this in any direction you want to, but the question is essentially, if a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, what is your definition of success? How would you answer them?
Oh man, you asked some tough questions, Tom.
My apologies, but that's the hey, you agreed to be here.
I think it's a great. You're awesome. I think it's a great question. I tell my wife all the time what a great mom she is, and she says, "Well, you're also doing 50% of the load here too." Um, I think success is for me when I hear my own kids, teachers, or friends' parents talk about how respectful and amazing my kids are. That's my own success
Mhm.
that shines through me and my wife, right?
Yeah.
If someone doesn't have kids, it's going to be what others say about their service and contribution and impact on others. And it's almost like full circle in this podcast. How are we going to become that memorable person that impacts other people?
Right.
And I speak my kids, what they do when I'm not around speaks about me. And that will maybe make all of us memorable, right? My entire family. Um, and again, those who don't have kids, in what ways will you be remembered for the great things that you do to help others?
Yeah.
I think that's success. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Being memorable again for the right reasons, not memorable for the wrong ones. With our children being, our legacy in terms of how they impact the world, and certainly if you don't have kids, this idea of how I am remembered, how I helped others, how I supported them, all of those things. Definitely, I love that. Listeners, you definitely can connect with Rick just about anywhere. Rick,
Well,
you are on Twitter and Instagram. The handle is at Rick Jetter. Rick is also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can head to Rick's website called rickjetter.com. There's also pushboundconsulting.com. I'll have links in the show notes for all of those different spots, so you can connect with Rick wherever you should choose. Rick, thanks for being here today. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much, Tom. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.